All right, well, welcome everybody to the final Kidlit Social of 2021. I almost said 2022. See, I'm numerically challenged today. I'm so glad you all took a little time out of your busy week to be with us tonight. This is going to be a really, really interesting discussion. For those of you who are with us for the first time, I am Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider, the Children's Writing Monthly, and co-producer of writingblueprints.com and writeforkids.org, celebrating our 31st year in business. We're about to hit 32 in May. 32 years in business. Whoa. Okay. So if you are new to us and you are curious about our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, which is celebrating its 31st year of publication, we have a special offer for our socialites, that's you, $5 a month. And it gets you a monthly newsletter delivered to your inbox. It's about 20 pages a month. And it includes marketing information as well as one special interview with either an agent or an editor who gives us an above the slush pile code that you can use to submit for a month, and your work jumps over the slush pile. And FYI, for those of you who are currently subscribers or thinking of subscribing in the next month, we are changing our submission format for above the slush codes in January, and there'll be an explanation of that in the newsletter in the January issue. You still get an exclusive code, etc., etc. It's just the way you submit is going to be a little different to make it easier on our editors and agents. And in the January 4th Kidlit Social, I'm going to have an agent and an editor on with me, and we are going to talk about how to know when your manuscript is ready to submit. Very important. So I really hope you join us all on January 4th for that one. Oh, writeforkids.org/CBI is where you find that special offer. And you also get access to our CBI Clubhouse membership site that goes with the newsletter, which has 31 years worth of information in it. All our back issues and archived articles and videos that I made just for the site and all sorts of great stuff. Okay. Now we get to celebrate your successes, and I have some awesome ones today. Okay. First of all, we're starting with, and I looked up how to say her name, Marian Iagam. I hope I said that right. Marian Iagam. Her debut picture book was just announced in Publishers Weekly. Yay! I Am a Force comes out from Source Books in March of 2023, and it's a STEM-based picture book that showcases a diverse cast of girls, that should be girls, each the personification of a force such as gravity, buoyance, and magnetism. What an awesome idea. That is the very definition of a high concept picture book. So Maria, congratulations on that. And when that book comes out in March of 2023, I want you to be in touch with me because I would like to have you on the social so we can talk about that amazing idea. Leslie Eva Talo has written that my first picture book will be published by Austin Macaulay Publishers, the UK office, and should be out in early 2022. It's titled I'm Fishing with Pop Pop Today. My second picture book to be published by Brandyline Publishers, Belle Isle Books, is titled Save the Trees, and it is expected to be released in February of 2023. Congratulations, Leslie. That is awesome to have 2 books cooking. One of them to come out very soon. So we really wish you the best of luck with that. That is great. And Ritu Anand's, and I hope I said your name right, her picture book, Caras Dreams, was acquired by Pathbinder Publishing to be released in spring of 2022. It's a story of a young pine sapling who wants to stand tall and strong like wise old Atsa, the tallest in the woods, but fears that wind, water, earth, and night might wipe her out during a storm. That sounds like a really magical story, and I love the cover. Isn't that a great cover? So congrats, Ritu, and best of luck with that. And I appreciate your patience. You sent me this announcement a few weeks ago, and we've had a little break from the socials. So I'm so glad we got to tell everybody about it today. All right. Send us your good news. Email mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and we will feature your news on a future Kidlit Social. No celebration is too small. You don't have to celebrate a publication. If you found a critique group, we want to hear about it. Okay, any step in your journey, we want to celebrate with you. And as a little aside to my CBI subscribers, we sent out a survey 6 weeks ago or so to our subscribers asking about, what you write, what stuff you'd like to see in webinars, etc. Thank you for filling that out. Several of you said that you had you had some successes that I could announce on the Kidlit Social, but you did not include your emails in the response. So I don't know who you are. So if you were one of those people, please email me, mail@writeforkids.org, and let me know. And I'm happy to share that good news in January. Oh, and by the way, several of you mentioned people you would like to see on the social who I've already had on the social. So please go to writeforkids.org, which is our main site. And at the very top, there's a little tab that says Kidlit Social Replays, and click on that and you will be able to watch anybody we've had over the last, 16 months now or so that we've done this. And I'm sure you'll discover some awesome interviews. But thank you for those suggestions. There were also some really good ones, and I will follow up in the new year with them. Okay, here's a really cool link of interest this week. Free children's book illustration template generator from author Evie Jones on her website. And so this creates templates for interior and cover illustrations, as well as the dimensions of your hardcover or paperback book if you're self-publishing with KDP or Ingram Spark. So it doesn't make the illustrations for you, but it tells you how big the pages are, how much bleed there is, the size of the illustration, etc., trim size, and if you're doing hardcover or paperback, you put in some little numbers, and then it spits out these templates for you, which is very useful if you are self-publishing and designing your own book. So here is the link, and we will also have this link below the replay when we send it out. But if you can't remember all of this, just go to eviejones.com, EEVIE Jones.com, and then click on, I think it's Tools for Writers along the top, and you'll see this come up. And thank you to Dana Alt for this wonderful tip. All right. So Todd Mitchell, my guest tonight, teaches creative writing and directs the beginning creative writing teaching program at Colorado State University. He's also the award-winning author of novels and graphic novels for middle grade and young adult readers. His newest book is a departure from his fiction writing. Breakthrough: How to Overcome Doubt, Fear, and Resistance to Be Your Ultimate Creative Self is an essential guide for writers, artists, and creators to help them break free of toxic success myths and transcend the suffering artist paradigm that we've all heard so much about. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, because I think that is such a great way to wrap up 2021 and get us ready for the new year. So I urge everyone to visit Todd's site at toddmitchellbooks.com to read his terrific advice for writers, and also lots of stuff about squirrels, which we're going to have another discussion about, I think, at some point. So Todd, welcome. Please join me on the social.
Hello.
Hey, great to have you here tonight.
Oh, it's very good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure.
It's so fun to speak with a group of writers like this.
Yeah. Well, you talk with writing types all day long in your teaching, right? In your job as a teacher.
I'm very lucky that way. But it
Mhm.
truly is one of the things I enjoy the most, is getting to talk with other people who are engaged in creative practices.
Mhm. It is, me too. It's a great way to make a living for sure. So let's get started here. Now, by any objective measure, you are considered a successful published author. And if you go to Todd's website, you'll see all the awards he's won. But you wrote in your book that you didn't feel like a success. So please tell us what led you to redefine success and ultimately write your book, Breakthrough.
Yeah, well, so it was a book that I wrote more out of necessity, that I hadn't planned to write. I now feel very lucky that the opportunity arose in my life for me to write this book. But
Mhm.
that opportunity came through a breakdown. And I kind of outline what drove me towards that personal breakdown in my own life. It was many decades in the making, as I
Mhm.
was chasing what I thought was success and what
Mhm.
I thought would make me happy.
Mhm.
And so you mentioned success myths, and I think we have a lot of myths of what people need to do to be successful. And I think how we often think about success is like, if only I do this, then I'll be happy. Um, and a lot of times with those achievements, you achieve whatever goal it was, and you actually feel exactly the same, or maybe even a little less happy, because you think, oh, I thought this would change things for me. I thought this would change my life for me. I thought I would feel differently once I achieved whatever goal it is. And instead, it's just the same. In fact, I'm a little more exhausted and maybe lost and frustrated now.
Mhm.
And when I was writing this book, I researched a lot of successful people, and I was astonished by how many highly successful people are unhappy and have recognized, like, this commercial success, whatever it is I was seeking, it did not make me happy. Um, Jim Carrey, for instance, I have this quote written down because I think it's really good. Jim Carrey, the actor, he said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of, so they can see that it's not the answer."
Mhm.
And I love that, because, it's like, what's the way out of this success myth is to realize, yeah, even if you got everything that you're thinking that would make you happy, it won't. That's not the answer. Um, or Elon Musk, who's now the world's richest person, uh, said in a 2018 interview, um, I don't think people, how do you put it? He said, I don't think very many people would want to be me. I don't think they'd be happy being me. And it just spoke to this like deep unhappiness that, to me, seemed very apparent in him. And if commercial success, fame, money is supposed to make us happy, that's a lot of what the myth is. We just need to look to the people who've achieved that to see, no, it doesn't work that way. And for
Mhm.
me, I had my own notion of what I wanted, what my if onlys were, what would make me happy. And as I started to achieve them, I realized I was just more harried, frenzied, distracted, and feeling less alive.
Mhm.
And that's eventually that led to a breakdown, as I just tried on that hedonic treadmill to do more and more and more, and found that it satisfied me less and less and less. So we think about success. What is success?
Mhm.
I think if we ask ourselves, well, why would I want to have a bestseller, or why would I want to earn a bunch of money, or whatever it is that we think is going to make us happy? It's because deep down we think, if only I do this, then I'll feel content. I'll be able to live my life the way I really want to live it.
Mhm.
And you could do that right now. You could live your life, you could feel that happiness. So if we redefine success not as some sort of achievement, but as being happy, not some short-term, temporary, reactive happiness, but a deep, fulfilling happiness, an unconditional happiness. If we redefine success that way, then I think we're at least setting off in a better direction.
Mhm. I agree. I agree. And that's That's such a simple idea, but it's so out of reach of so many people. It's not the kind of thing that we all go, oh yeah, of course I knew that. We didn't know
Yeah.
that, or we would be doing it, right? Um,
Well, because we have to fight against the myth,
yeah.
like, oh, yeah, you can't just be happy. You have to do this. You have to do this, and you have to gain this. And if only you had this. And so it's really hard to disconnect from that myth to realize that's not the way. There's a better way.
Yeah, totally. So in your book, you talk about taking the commercial aspect out of success
Mhm.
and also not comparing ourselves to other people who are, especially in a creative endeavor, who are pursuing the same type of creative pursuit that we're doing.
Yeah.
So comparing ourselves to other authors.
Yeah.
So in our Western culture, money and comparison are our two biggest markers for success. In
Yeah.
the book business, it's like we all want to win the Newbery or the Caldecott, right?
Yeah.
That means that some award committee said, you're better than all these other people there. There's a comparison, and that's how we mark success. So how hard is it to shift our mind to these intangible guideposts, and how long did it take you to be able to do this?
Yeah. Well, there's so many things in that question. First, I just want to say, well, imagine if we saw success as I defined it a moment ago, as being happy on the deepest, most fulfilling level that we can conceive of. Now, if we held up people who did that as
Mm-hmm.
successes,
Mm-hmm.
if we look to that as our guiding stars or our mentors or our models, the people to admire, how would that change our understanding of our own success and our own direction? So if we thought, and I do this now more and more in my life as I encounter people like, wow, that was an incredibly happy, warm, giving, open person who is enjoying their life,
Mm-hmm.
who is enjoying being. That is success. That is a person who is just enjoying creating things. That is what creative success is, like doing what you love and loving what you do every day. That's the peak of creative success, because that's what I'm seeking. That's the life I want for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So much better than saying, if only I get this award, then I'll feel good. No, it won't work that way for you. But if I'm not against commercial success. I think it's great if your book takes off. It's great if you win an award. It's like, there's nothing wrong with that. And as a writer, I still want different forms of commercial
Mm-hmm.
success. I no longer judge myself by that. And I no longer gauge my happiness by that. I no longer even set out for that. Instead, I think the far better way is to focus on intrinsic happiness. Um, being happy, doing what you're doing, loving what you're doing, and doing what you love.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing about this is, if you orientate yourself more to that intrinsic, unconditional happiness, you will actually be more creative. Your creative practice will become more sustainable because you're enjoying what you're doing. You're enjoying all stages of the process. And you are far more likely then to have that commercial success that you might want to. And it was Dolly Parton who I think summed this up really great in an interview I heard with her just 2 years ago, where she said, I don't work for awards or rewards. I work simply because I love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, has been her guiding star throughout her whole career. And this is someone who has 64 Grammys or some
Yeah.
incredible number like that, has been in multiple movies, has like commercial success in all these different areas. And yet that's not what she's after. She's just, I work because I love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the mindset
Yeah.
that is both much more enjoyable, but is also much more sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you work for achievements and then you realize those achievements don't satisfy, you are bound to get frustrated and burn
Yeah.
yourself out.
Yeah. No, that's true. And if you love what you do, you're probably going to work harder because you enjoy it so much. And then
Yeah.
that's going to also lead to different kinds of success. If, commercial type or recognition or whatever, even if that's not what you're going for the fact that you are just having more creative output because you're enjoying it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not necessarily work harder because you're actually enjoying the work that you're
Yes.
doing. So you're following your bliss. And it does mean, though, that you're able to sustain that work longer. But I think more importantly, you're able to work smarter because you're more open. You're
Mm-hmm.
more open to what creativity is telling you. You're
Right.
more open to seeing what's going on in the world and connecting with others.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is when I was like, oh, I have to try harder, I have to do more, I have to achieve this. Well, then I was getting this tunnel vision,
Mm-hmm.
this like, was clenching my fists, gritting my teeth. And I prided myself for decades on being one of the grittiest of the gritties, like never going to give up, always going to try harder, going to stay longer, going to do more. And it just didn't work. That doesn't work. Now, you asked earlier, how long did it take me to shift my mindset? Well, it took me most of my life to realize that struggle and try harder and suffer and do more path is not the best path.
Mm-hmm.
And is not even the best path for achieving commercial success if that's what you're
Mm-hmm.
after.
Right.
So in one sense, I guess it took me like 30 plus years to drive myself to this breakdown, which I think of as now my fortunate breakdown, because
Mm-hmm.
then that breakdown enabled me to research and to find a much better way. Because I spent almost a decade researching creativity for this book too, and
Mm-hmm.
interviewing people and trying to figure out what that better way is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think in some ways it has to take that long. If you were to tell, uh, I don't know. Well, my son is 25. Okay, and
Yeah.
he's an artist, and his dream is at some point to illustrate children's books. He's also got a day job. He's smart enough. He's been around me long enough to know, do something else for money so that you could pay your rent. But anyway, he is in this work hard mode. He's just thrown himself into it. He's researching. He's following his favorite illustrators. He's drawing every day. He's doing this, which is great. If I were to tell him, it's not how hard you work, it's that you have to love it and that'll bring success, he might not get it yet because he
Yeah.
hasn't got the life experience to really judge whether or not that's true. And I think sometimes you have to go through some life and you have to kind of experience the other way to
Yeah.
prove to yourself that maybe that's not working.
Yes. Yeah. And so for a lot of the young people that I work with, the college students and the graduate students,
Mm-hmm.
part of my hope for them is that they'll figure that out quicker than I did.
Yeah, you hope so, right?
And so to plant the seeds of, okay, we have this societal myth, we have this notion of this achievement addiction that's
Mm-hmm.
reinforced in our society. You have to work hard, achieve more, and keep trying to achieve more, and then maybe someday you'll achieve enough to be happy. That's the myth.
Right. Right.
And I think we have to experience that a bit before we can see how destructive that ultimately is, and even destructive to our creativity, to our
Mm-hmm.
ability to be
Mm-hmm.
creative, that we are so much more creative when we're open and happy,
Mm-hmm.
when we're following the blissful path.
That's true.
But I certainly would have been someone who thought, oh no, that sounds too woo-woo. I can't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So I wrote this book to put down some actual techniques to change your mindset, but also with the hope that maybe I could help point some of those younger writers
Mm-hmm.
to a more productive and enjoyable path earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I could have helped my younger self. And I wrote the book for myself because
Sure.
I need these reminders. I need to see, oh yes, I'm playing the comparison game. That's not a good way to motivate yourself.
No.
So how do you stop playing the comparison game? And
Mm-hmm.
I've got several chapters on that. But I think we all know versions of this comparison game, like, oh, they're doing it, I need to do it. Why them and not me? And I
Mm-hmm.
think we can notice how that starts to erode our energy, our sense of satisfaction, even our ability to create or set about a creative task, because ultimately we start feeling I'm not good enough.
Right.
I
Right.
can't create what I feel like feel called to create.
Exactly. And you don't know what's going on in their head. They could be following their bliss, and that's why it looks so effortless and amazing from the outside.
Yes.
You don't know what how they're getting to where they are. Yeah. So you write a lot about ego in your book, and you
Yes.
talk a lot about this. So let's, first of all, what is ego in this context, and how does it get in our way of our creativity?
Yeah. So I get pretty research-based and extensive in talking about what exactly the ego is, or what I'm referring to as the ego in this book. But I think a really simple way to think of it is, if you imagine all of existence as if it were just like a bunch of dots on a page. Just imagine that I had, billions and billions of dots, and this represented everything that exists. The ego is the infinitesimally small arbitrary circle that you put around a tiny collection of those dots and say, this is me. This is the part I identify with and care about and want to preserve and protect. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have egos, and the development of an ego is really important for our development of being a human being and being a whole person. But the ego is also extremely limiting. So it's, with that circle around that tiny collection of dots that you say, this is me, this is what I identify with and want to preserve and protect, it's essentially a collection of limiting beliefs. And when we think of creativity, one general definition of what creativity is it's bringing something new and somehow useful into existence. So for you to bring something new and somehow useful into existence, by definition, you have to get beyond your ego. Your ego clings to what it knows. It cannot bring new things into existence.
Right.
So the ego often stands in the way of creativity. And it stands in the way because it fears the unknown, but it also fears how creativity, the creative process, can make us vulnerable to criticism, to doubt, and to failure. Failure is the thing the ego fears most. And failure is not a bad thing. I argue a bit in the book that actually embracing failure is a really good thing, because failure is one of the ways that we can lessen the ego's limiting grasp. It's part of what kind of cracks open the ego. And so going back to your son, young people need to experience a bit of failure so that they can understand what their ego is and how their ego is limiting them, and how ultimately it's okay to fail. That failure is part of creativity. It's part of getting beyond the small self, and connecting with that creative source. So it turns out that a lot of the practices that sages, monks, mystics, teachers, philosophers, and psychologists have been talking about, in some cases for centuries or millennia, for how we can get beyond our limiting ego minds, are the same sort of practices that I think can help us reestablish a relationship with creativity and become more creative, to enhance our connection with creativity.
Yes, I totally agree. And I love that definition of ego, because, if you read books on, say, Buddhism and some other practices, and a lot of people talk about ego, or psychiatrists, whatever, it's all a slightly different take on what it means.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's really our own construct of who we are. And we can hang on to it for dear life and let it limit us, or we can chip away at it. And failure is one of those ways we chip away at it, like you said. Yeah.
And gain perspective on it. Like awareness, consciousness is one of the best ways to limit or lessen your ego's limiting grasp. So as we become aware of how our ego is causing us to suffer, punishing us when we fail, and as we become aware of how the ego is getting in the way of the creative process, that awareness itself can help us start to dissolve the ego.
Mm-hmm.
But what interests me most is really how the ego starts to manifest in the creative process and how it starts to get in the way of that creative process.
Mm-hmm. How does it get in the way of us? Say if you're a writer and you take your work to a critique group
Mm-hmm.
and they give you constructive criticism,
Yeah.
and you immediately on the outside, you may be saying, thank you very much. But on the inside, you just feel this wall go up. You go, oh
Yes.
my God, either they're wrong, period, or I'm a terrible writer, period. And I shouldn't be doing this. I'm an imposter. I'm going to go find something else to do with my time. I'm never coming back here. How does ego play into those sorts of dynamics as a writer?
Yeah. So the ego fears criticism,
Mm-hmm.
really hates criticism and often gets defensive and lashes out against criticism. And like you said, puts up that wall, doesn't listen. Uh, but if you're able to take a more transpersonal perspective, to step outside yourself for a moment, kind of notice that ego tension, notice that fear, develop your observer consciousness. So you're seeing how yourself is reacting. You might recognize that you're not losing anything
Yeah.
with that criticism. The criticism is not changing what you've created in any way. So when you create something and somebody else criticizes it, you haven't lost anything. You have the ability, though, to gain something from that. So I feel that there's you were talking about constructive criticism, hopefully in a safe environment. As writers, we're trying to help each other out. And then I think there's that scarier criticism when we put a work out there,
Right.
that somebody might say something really mean about it, which happens quite frequently. And in fact, you can go on Goodreads and look up some of the most beloved books of all time,
Oh yeah.
and see like how people trashed The Great Gatsby, or trashed To Kill a Mockingbird, or have trashed Catcher in the Rye.
Charlotte's Web was trashed when it first came out, and
Yeah.
yes,
Well, so
yes.
critics trashed these when it came out, but even now, like a lot of people will give these things 1 star. My therapist said, you gotta love the 1 star people. I think that a lot. You gotta love the 1 star people because they're carrying the burden of our negativity. They're carrying the burden of our criticism. But that's still not easy to do,
Right.
right? So one of the tricks that I've found, is, well, first off, you might recognize that when somebody harshly criticizes something, that has a lot more to do with their own ego than the work itself.
Right.
It has to do quite often with a person trying to make themselves feel bigger or seem bigger by tearing something down. And there's that old adage, takes a carpenter to build a barn, but what is it? Any jerk with a match can burn it down.
Turn it down. Yeah.
And we see that a lot in our hypercritical culture, like
Mm-hmm.
people driven by their own ego, trying to make themselves bigger by criticizing things publicly. But the magic question to ask yourself is, how does this serve? So if somebody criticizes something, even criticizes it harshly, to ask yourself, how does this serve? And if that criticism actually helps you see something in your work that maybe you kind of knew needed to be fixed, but you were tuning out that voice or ignoring it, or it gives you some sort of opportunity to dig deeper into a story, then it can serve you. Then listen to that criticism. But if that criticism is actually just serving to prop up your own ego, which is saying things like, and that's why I told you not to create, you should have put yourself out there, then it's not serving you. It's serving your ego's attempt to limit you from creativity. And just walk past it, say, okay, thanks, ego. I know that you're doing your job, trying to protect me,
Yes.
but you don't need to. It's okay to be criticized. Everybody's criticized. All great work gets
Mhm.
criticized.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to keep putting myself out there, and I'm going to use some of that criticism maybe to like chip away at my ego and say, all right, you know, now I see you, ego. I'm going
Sure.
to let your boundaries dissolve a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that we tell our people is it's impossible to write a book that will be beloved by everyone in the
Yeah.
world. It's just not possible.
And it's a
And
bad
so
idea to try.
it's a bad idea to try because it'll be so watered down, you won't end
Yes.
up saying anything.
Yeah.
And so you figure out who the audience is that you really want to reach with your work and you write for them. And if they get it, you're good.
Yes.
And everyone else, it doesn't really matter because you weren't writing for them. If they get it, great. But if not, okay, so what? And I know that's a hard thing for writers to learn at first because it does feel like it's personal when
Yeah.
someone criticizes a work. But I think the writers who get past that and realize they're not criticizing me, they're criticizing this book. And okay, so what? It makes it a lot easier to keep going for sure.
Or, you know, and it's really for a work to find the readers who can appreciate it. Like that's the goal. And you need to start with
Yes.
yourself. Like
Mhm,
write something that you appreciate. And if you
mhm,
do that, that in itself is a huge success. You know, going
mhm.
back to those intrinsic motivations and intrinsic happiness, you know,
Yeah.
so write first to please yourself. And then if others connect with it, wow, that's such a good thing.
Mhm. Yeah. That's really the gift there for sure. So you write about the difference between trying and being.
Yeah.
So how does this apply to creativity, in particular to writing? For example, learning the craft of writing feels like there's a lot of trying there. You know, you're deliberately trying to master a skill. So
Mhm.
how do we shift more to the being in that respect?
Yeah. So in the writing process, and the thing here is that trying gets exhausting.
Mm,
Um, Being feels effortless and allows you to align yourself with life, align yourself with the creative energy of the universe, and create more genuinely and effectively.
mhm.
So I think in our own lives, and I give some examples of this in the book, like we know the difference between trying and being. You know, if we see somebody trying to be funny,
Yeah.
it often comes out forced, maybe a little cringy, and often not very funny, versus being funny, somebody who's in the moment,
Mhm.
um, and you know is much more spontaneous. But in our work, in our creative process, we think I have to try to do this. Here's something really interesting, though. When I was studying creativity, I found that, and there's been studies on this, that when you tell people try to be creative, you know,
Mm.
they actually get less creative.
Yeah, it's pressure. And
Right.
you go, I have to think of something creative to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, so if for instance you give them a blank page and you say, all right, you know, try doing something really creative on this.
Mhm.
Suddenly our ability to be creative is constrained by our notion of what we think creative is. So
Right.
we start thinking, what would be a really creative response? You know, how
Mhm.
could I do something different? How could I impress this person? So right there, you see how
Yeah.
trying to seem creative, trying to impress somebody is starting to interfere with the creative process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus, you know, again, if well, the sort of things that actually help people be more creative, the sort of statements that you can say are let your wild mind go free.
Mhm.
Write whatever comes to you. You know, let
Mhm.
it be silly, strange, weird. Don't worry about making something good.
Mhm.
So what that does is it starts to open us up to creativity
Mhm.
and allows us to discover what wants to be created.
Hmm.
So I find in my own writing practice, when I notice myself trying to make something be what I think it should be, I recognize that I'm interfering with creativity.
Right.
And so the shift in mindset is to switch from telling something what to be, telling your story what you want it to be. Oh, I want you to be a bestseller. I want you to be like all this stuff that actually starts just interfering with creativity. Instead, you shift from telling to asking.
Mm-hmm.
And you might ask, what is its story that you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
You might ask your character, what am I getting wrong about you? Who are you? How can I show you better on the page?
Mm-hmm.
So this shift from telling something what to be to asking, how do you help bring it into existence is a
Right.
great way to get around that ego mind.
Huh. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. Yeah.
And there's old, there's old writing activities with this, like asking a character to write you a letter
Mm-hmm.
in their own voice about what you got wrong about them. For me, that ended up being something that completely unlocked a book I had been trying to revise for 5 years, this book. But when I asked the main character, James, to write me a letter about what I was getting wrong, then his voice came through.
Huh.
Then I stopped trying to make this the story I thought it should be. And I let James tell me his story, and things started to fall in place in that magical way that happens when you're just being creative.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I love that. I love that. Okay. So you'd also talk about the hero's journey in your book,
Yeah.
which, as writers here, a lot of you are familiar with the hero's journey. It's a plot structure, a very uh, classic age-old plot structure. How does this apply to creativity and creative endeavors?
Yeah. So I think writers often have a leg up in understanding the transformative process. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, what we're doing when we're creating stories is we're putting characters on a transformative journey.
Mm-hmm.
And the hero's journey is one way to look at all the different stages in that transformative journey. I like to think of plot, for instance, as transformation in the face of adversity. So you give your character problems and challenges, both internal and external, as a way to push them to a point of transformation, or at least a point where there's a possibility of them transforming. And that's often what the climatic moment of a story is. Will they
Mm-hmm.
change or won't? Will they have some sort of insight that allows them to be a little different or not? But the fascinating thing for me as a writer is when we're engaged in that process of transforming a character, writing a story, throwing challenges at them, developing a plot, we are not just transforming that character, we are also transforming ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That we embark as writers on a transformative journey too. And as I started to research this, I started to find out, to see that the stages that writers often go through, or creators often go through when they're creating something, mirror the stages in the hero's journey. So, for instance, first there might be a call to adventure,
Mm-hmm.
a call to create something. We have this idea and we feel drawn towards it. We feel called to write a book or write a novel. And then there might be the refusal of the call. I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's too hard. I don't have the right ability for that. There may be a meeting of the mentor. And by the way, if I had one of my slides up here, you would see this call to adventure, the refusal of the call, the meeting of the mentor. These are all things that Joseph Campbell talked about and others who
Mm-hmm.
have mapped out this hero's journey. So the mentor might be someone who guides us and inspires us and helps us see, maybe I can do this. But there will also be threshold guardians. And these can come both internally and externally. These can be those voices of doubt or procrastination or distraction, but they might also be other people outside us, sometimes even family members, who might say, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, I get into why people do that, why threshold guardians, why people sometimes are threatened by other people's creativity, and how to work past that. And then when we decide, okay, I'm going to embark on this creative journey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to try and write this book, well, that's passing through the first threshold and embarking on the journey, on the creative journey. And that's just the first act. And then we get into some of the much more interesting stages of the creative process, where we might get swallowed up in the belly of the whale, as we lose ourselves in a book and we lose all sense of what we were doing, or we lose ourselves in research. Some of the later stages, after we really often wrestle with doubt and might have that dark night of the soul, our apotheosis, which is where we're offered some sort of gift or awareness, and then we try and bring that back to the ordinary world. And this is where we might have a refusal to return. So when we're in the creative space, wow, we feel like a god. As writers, we sometimes are like gods, creating a whole world, and everything as can be exactly what we want it to be, as long as we don't have other people read it or see it.
Yeah.
So there can be that refusal to return to an active vision for others to see. So knowing all this, knowing how the stages in the creative process are represented by stages in the hero's journey, can help us also figure out, how do we work through this transformative process? How do we deal more gracefully with some of these creative challenges? And also deal more gracefully with our own challenges as we embark on our own transformative journey, face that dark night of the soul.
Right. Well, that's fascinating, but you're right. Just listening to you explain it like that, there are so many parallels. The hero's journey, the writer's journey, or the creative journey, it doesn't have to be writing. Wow.
And
so
there's a lot to talk about there. I go into it for, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 chapters in the book that kind of break down the different parts. And, I think people get hung up on different parts. They, might get derailed at different parts of the journey. And so then to recognize, here's where I am, here's why this is happening, and here's the way past it, can really help us get unstuck and hopefully save us a lot of time and agony.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you don't get too worried, if you're familiar with the hero's journey and you're starting out as a writer, this doesn't mean that you are going to encounter all these things. Do people have to be afraid? Oh no, now I see what's coming.
Well, fear comes from our ego, which is trying to hold us back. No, embark on the journey. You're going to love it. You're going to love every stage of the process for what it can teach you. And as you encounter those challenges, ask yourself, how does this serve?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to get to a few questions here, but before we do, I want to ask you, you're a big advocate of meditation. And how does this help with creativity? And what if we're not very good at the meditation? Does it still help?
Well, as I talk about in the book, I suck at meditation. It's okay to suck at meditation. That's part of the point of meditation. And first off, I see creativity and the creative process now, engaging with creativity, as a form of meditation. I think a reason to do it is that as we create every day and as we develop a relationship with creativity, we're expanding our consciousness and our awareness. And we're getting beyond our ego, as the creative process requires that getting beyond our ego, and that this is intrinsically beneficial, not just to ourselves, but it can make us more compassionate, connected, empathetic, and aware human beings. And so I think creativity is intrinsically beneficial for everyone, for all of our society. And that's why I love encouraging people to create. And I love speaking with groups of creative people, because we are all engaged in this practice that is very helpful to humanity as a whole. as well as to us as individuals. So first off, a creative practice can be approached as a meditative practice. You don't have to say, okay, now I need to meditate on top of this. You can make your creative practice your meditative practice. But I have also found practice of meditation itself is really great at quieting those ego blocks.
Right.
The doubt, the desire to procrastinate, the frustration, the fear, all those manifestations of the ego mind that get in the way of creativity. A meditative practice really helps you become aware of that and to let those voices settle. So I think of meditation, and this is a metaphor that's often used for meditation, but I find it really helpful, is if you picture your mind as being like a bowl of muddy water, because it's constantly stirred up. Well, how do you make the water clear? Stirring it more doesn't help. And we stir our minds all the time with our thoughts, and we're sensing, I need to do this and this and this. I can't do that. I need to do this. 20 minutes of meditation is a way that you let the mud settle out so that the water becomes clear. And all you need to do for meditation is sit and breathe and tell yourself, as your mind's like, I can't do this. I need to do this instead. I have things to do. You just say, I'm doing nothing. I'm meditating. Doing nothing. I'm meditating. Just focus on your breathing. Now, there's other practices. I've listed quite a lot of different meditative practices that I find very helpful. And one of the most helpful is acceptance meditations. Just as everything comes up, accept it just the way it is. I accept this. Oh, acceptance feels so good. If you ask yourself, what would it feel like if I completely accepted everything? Right. Oh no, says the ego mind, you can't accept everything. You can't accept this. No, but what would it feel like? It would feel wonderful, blissful.
Yeah.
If you can experience that for a moment, to expand that experience. So why meditate? Because you'll feel good. And then your mind will be clear. You'll develop more awareness of your mind, and you'll actually be more productive. There's, a Zen saying about this. Meditate for 20 minutes a day, unless you don't have time, in which case you need to meditate for an hour a day.
That's so true. I love that. Awesome. Well, let me get to some questions. This has been great. I mean, you've given us so much, and I hope you all feel supercharged from this, because I do. I feel very just charged up from this conversation. But people have been asking where to get your book. So bookstores, I mean, this is available widely, Amazon bookstores, etc., correct?
Yeah, and I have the chat going on there. I see Terry just posted the link on Amazon. Thank you very much for doing that.
Yes.
And this book just came out less than 2 months ago. It came out in November. So please, if you order it, especially if you order it from Amazon, post a review, because those verified reviews help tremendously. And a review doesn't need to be long, just a sentence or two to let people know what you think or what you found useful in a book. Or there's some neat images that we got permission to use from Linda Berry, who's one of my favorite cartoonists. She won a MacArthur Genius Award a couple of years ago. And I have a chapter on her essay, 2 Questions, which you can find the entirety of online. But that's a great one for anybody who's struggling with creativity to read. The 2 questions, by the way, are, is this good or does this suck? And she looks at how those 2 questions completely destroyed her connection to creativity. There are 2 questions that come from the ego, because the ego is a judgment machine. I always distract myself. Sorry. Yeah, you can get the book hopefully anywhere books are sold. You can ask your indie store, your local indie store, to order it. I always appreciate that. And you can get it on Barnes and Noble, or IndieBound, or Bookshop, which is a great way of connecting with local bookstores.
Yes, Bookshop's great. Okay, awesome. Well, let's get to a few questions here. So Sheila asks, first of all, she says, thank you. This has been amazing. how did you marry your own creative insights and experiences with all the research you did? She says, so much of what you say rings true for me. Do you have any favorite practices for being in the creative flow and letting go of trying? So we talked about meditation. That was really sort of two questions there. How did you marry your own creative insights and experiences with all the research you did? Did the research come out of you looking for answers? Is that sort of how the research started?
Okay, so I had a breakdown, which was pretty severe. And, again, I go into the details of that in the book. And because I couldn't go on, not just go on creatively, I was at the end of my rope and didn't know how to go on in life at all. I got really lucky in connecting with an existential therapist who started me on a journey that helped me out. And I've seen counselors and therapists throughout my life, and I'm familiar with many different therapeutical models and practices. But what this therapist started me on was much different from that. And I outlined that in some of the later chapters of the books. And it's not for everyone. But it did break through the ego limitations that I had set for myself. And I think that's the key thing, is we have to become aware of how the ego is limiting us, and then have these experiences that start to crack open our ego and allow us to see beyond it. And so after I had these experiences with this therapist, who, by the way, I guess if you're interested in a lineage or a school, he lived and worked with Ram Dass for many years. Ram Dass, who wrote Be Here Now, and who I also think is a great teacher. And so this kind of set me on some different paths, Advaita Vedanta being one non-dual path. I also studied Tantra and tantric practices. I'd studied Buddhism for several decades before this, but these sorts of non-dual teachings are not limited to Eastern philosophies or Eastern belief traditions. I quote Rumi quite a lot in this book, a Sufi poet who I think is another wonderful non-dual teacher. And there's Christian non-dual traditions as well that I integrate some of that as I started to research some of the Gnostic texts. So I researched a lot of spiritual teachers and philosophers, Stoics. And then as I started to research psychology and psychologists, I found a lot of these very different schools of thought are actually seeing very similar things. So I was trying to bring together some of that, scientific studies, psychological research, neuroscience on the brain. And my wife, she studies the science of learning, so she was really helpful there in bringing in a lot of what we know about how we learn and gain new skills and growth mindset, and merging these with the older traditions. So yes, there are a lot of different threads that come together, with the hope that people will find what works for them.
Right. Yeah, because everybody needs to find what works best for them. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. And you give a lot of information in this book, lots of different ideas. So it's really a great starting point, I think, your book. And then if something resonates, you can then go with it and really learn more on your own. Yeah,
that's my hope.
So this is a great question from Anonymous. So first, Anonymous says he or she really liked your comment. You need to shift from telling your story what you want it to be to asking the story what it wants to be. Great point. But what about writing an outline? That's one of the big, especially if you're writing a novel, a lot of writing instruction says create an outline. Isn't that telling the story what you want it to be? So how do you pull these two ideas together?
So I outline, I'm very detailed outliner of my books. And I see outlining as part of the process of writing and part of connecting with creativity. So, if you ask yourself, well, where does the story idea come from? Often they come in these visions. It surprised me as I was researching how many books, as well as like really outstanding innovations or ideas, come from dreams.
Mm,
Maybe delving into our subconscious or our unconscious, or even our collective unconscious. So again, getting beyond that limiting ego mind. So the outline then is a way of saying, okay, I have this idea. What needs to happen for
mhm,
for this story to take place? Again, it can be done through questioning. Um, and okay, here's the character. What are the challenges the character might face? What is the desire that drives this character on? What might motivate this character? How would I show it? What scenes are necessary? So
mhm,
for me, the outlining process is really a process of asking a lot of questions of the story and trying
mhm,
to, as Black Elk said, enact the vision for others to see.
mhm,
But the key thing is, so even though I have often very detailed outlines for my books, sometimes like 80-page outlines for these books, as I write the book and I'm starting in that journey of enacting the vision for others to see, to let things change
mhm.
as you're on this journey of discovery.
Right.
If you say the book has to stick to the outline, I think readers are going to sense that, and it's going to
Mhm.
feel kind of very formulaic.
Yeah.
Um, so I like to think of an outline as, say you want to go on a trip. I'm in Colorado, so you want to go on a trip to the West Coast. I was just planning a trip to the West Coast earlier today. So you want to go on a trip to the West Coast, and you're like, oh, let's pick a spot. We're going to pick San Francisco. And so then you look at the map and you map out, I'm going to go on this road and this road and this road. I might stop here, see this site, this site, this site. That's your outline. But the map is not the journey. So as you go on the journey, to really enjoy the journey and to have it be a journey of discovery, you've got to let yourself
Yeah.
say, actually, that looks more interesting over there. I'm going to
Mhm.
turn off there.
Yeah.
And maybe you won't end up in San Francisco.
Hmm.
Maybe you're going to end up, in here's the little town I was looking for, Netarts, Oregon. Like you might veer off quite a bit. So to put this in practical terms, every time with every book I've written, I had this detailed outline and what I thought would be the ending. And every time I wrote that scene, it landed dead on the page. And then I
Hmm.
had to ask myself, okay, what is the ending? And
Yeah.
always the discovered ending has been so much better. So
Hmm.
outlining, don't let it be a straitjacket. Don't like restrict the journey to just what's on the map. Um, Instead, just use it as part of the process.
Hmm.
But I think it's always best to write to discover, just try and figure things
Yeah.
out as you go along.
Hmm. Hmm. Great. Great. So Susan asks, how can I help my critique partners get unstuck and not give up? So if critique
Yeah.
partners are really bound with their ego and you want to help them, what can you do in a way that they'll listen?
Yeah. I think it is so important for creators to support other creators,
Hmm.
and to recognize how difficult it is to bring new things into existence and to support each other on that process.
Uh-huh.
And this doesn't necessarily mean, though, just like lavish them with praise. It means support them going on this journey and
Hmm.
saying things to each other like, I love the risks you're taking in this story. I really admire how you're trying to do something difficult here, or how unusual this story is. What is it that calls to you in this story? That's a question that I ask my critique partners a lot, like, especially when maybe a draft isn't looking so great,
Hmm.
but I know there's something there. And I can tell them, like, I can tell you what interests me, but really what I want to know is what called to you in this? What
Hmm.
interests you? How can we help bring that out more? How can we help each other create what we feel called to create?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So you're asking questions just as you are with your story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
And,
Yeah.
and when a writer can tell that, when they can say, you know, what I was really interested in was this, like,
Mhm.
this is what I'm fascinated by. Often that gives them the keys to unlock however
Yes.
they're stuck. You know, if you're a really attentive listener, that's what we want as writers, is those
Mhm.
attentive listeners, those attentive readers who can say, wow, this thing,
Mhm.
you know, this thing that you have going on here, this is really unusual. I've never seen a story do this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let's look at that a little more. Let's shine a light on that.
Mhm. Yeah. Nice. Great. Last question, I think. Yes. From Charlene. Was The Artist's Way a part of your research, the book, The Artist's Way?
Mhm.
And if so, what did you get from that book? So do you want to explain briefly The Artist's Way, what it is, if people haven't read it or aren't aware of it?
I have a copy over here, actually. If you let me see if I can dig it up.
Sure.
Uh-oh. I have these piles of books.
Sure,
I might not
we
be
can all
able to
relate
find
to
my
that.
copy of The Artist's Way. Um, but if you could see over there, I have several stacks of books. Those are my to read books. So I'm going to
Yeah.
confess something. I have not read The Artist's Way.
Mhm.
And I didn't read it because if I suspect a book may be, you know, treading in similar territory as my own book, I
Right.
don't want to read it. But I did get a copy of The Artist's Way, just so I could make sure that I wasn't doing the same thing. You know, so I looked at
Mhm.
what her
Mhm.
chapters are and what's talked about in that book. And I think it's a great book, and it's my plan uh, in 2020 to read it and go through it. I've really liked the parts I've looked at, but I think,
Mhm.
and correct me, Laura, are you familiar with The Artist's Way?
I am. It's been quite a while since I read it. Julia Cameron is the
Yeah,
author.
yeah.
So it takes a sort of a spiritual look at uh creativity in I wouldn't say the same way you do, but I think they could be complementary in a lot of ways, your books. Yeah. But anyway, continue, please.
Yes, I think a lot of what she talks about there, from what I've seen of the book, is developing a creative habit, doing morning pages,
Mhm.
kind of
Right.
getting past,
There's a lot of processes. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
getting past a lot of the, maybe the two questions and the judgmental mind and the ego mind. Um, and I think where my book differs is I really wanted to give practical techniques on the how. You know, so not just to
Mhm.
say, um, you know, don't think, just write. And
Yeah.
you know, like, don't judge your work, or don't let create doubt and fear hold you back. You know, there's a lot of platitudes out there, but we might have the reaction, for instance, with the comparison game. Oh, the comparison game, it's bad.
Yeah.
But how do you stop playing it? How do you stop
Mhm.
doing it? So what I really wanted to look at is like techniques for the how. And it
Mhm.
starts with understanding the why.
Sure.
Like, why does our
Mhm.
mind do this to us? Why do we play the comparison game? Um, but then when we get into the how, especially in part 3 of the book, um, there's a lot of practices that I hadn't seen in any other book on creativity,
Right. Mhm.
that I feel like maybe go a little deeper into how we can make this a practice. But if you just read
Mhm.
the book, you're not going to get it. You have to actually do the work of trying
Yes.
out some of these techniques and practices.
Yes. No, I totally agree. And I think it was probably good that you didn't read The Artist's Way first because you might have unintentionally pulled things from it. But I think that they're both great books, and her, just a couple things I remember from The Artist's Way was the morning page. It's like you said, it's
Mhm.
stream of consciousness. It's just to sort of, again, get your ego out of the way. I don't think she says it that way, but and then you make a date, a creativity date, I think, or an artist date, where you set aside blocks of time to nurture your creativity. So it's very intentional in that way. So I think
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with reading both and seeing
Yeah.
what you can pull from it.
Yeah. And part of what that date talks about, which I think is really important, is to celebrate creativity, to appreciate even
Yes.
small creative acts, because that's part of how we can make creativity more enjoyable for us, and then easier to get past that ego mind, which might say, oh, you can't do that right now.
Yeah.
Procrastination, for instance, is a manifestation of the ego. And one way to get past
Yes.
procrastination is to recognize how enjoyable creativity
Mhm.
is once we
Right.
get into it.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So rituals that help us celebrate and appreciate are really beneficial.
I agree with that. And I think there's something about rituals that kind of put us in that space. You know, it's time, it sort of triggers you that this is my time to be creative, or you know, you're entering a different sort of zone with the ritual.
Yeah.
It's easy to get so caught up in our lives and just the chores and the appointments and the to-do lists, and you know, without setting aside that time, whether it's a ritual or a date
Mhm.
or you make with yourself, whatever, for the to nurture the creativity as well. So
So setting
I
aside the time is an area that a lot of people have challenges. Like, how do I make
Mhm.
time to do this? And some
Yeah.
really simple practical things, it could be, yes, having a ritual or a time every day, but it could be something like paying yourself. Yeah,
Oh
create a creative
yeah.
bank.
Why not?
And every day that you show up, even just for 20 minutes to do some creative work, not to search the internet, but just like to write, let whatever come through, give yourself $5.
Yeah.
It
Really.
can really motivate you. Or if you meet your creative goals for the day, give yourself $5. It's kind of just simple ways to hack your brain with behavioral
Mhm.
training so that you're
Sure.
making the creative practice easier to do. I pay
Yeah.
myself in jelly beans to create.
Yeah. Great idea. Yeah, why not?
Mm.
I didn't realize we had gone so late here. This has just been a fascinating conversation. So I want to let you go, but Marie asked real quick. She loved what you said about critique partners and supporting your critique partners. She's wondering if you have anything on your website about that, or specifically, is that in your book about supporting the critique partners? And Marie, you'll get the replay of this
Mhm.
social as well, so you can always watch it again. But I just wanted to check with you if you had anything on your website specifically
I
about
don't have
working with.
anything on my website on it. I do have things in the book. Um,
Mhm.
I think one of the most helpful things is a practice from Buddhism called mudita, which
Mhm.
is in one of the later parts of the book. Um, but mudita is sympathetic and vicarious joy. It's celebrating with each other, um,
Mm.
and it's a way to completely annihilate the comparison game.
Yes.
Um, but I think with critique groups, for instance, is feeling each other's success.
Mhm.
So when one person achieves something, there can be a tendency to have that comparison game come in and feel, oh, that's really great that they did this, but now I feel like, why them and not me?
Right.
But instead to recognize that somebody else's success actually has a lot to do with you. And you can celebrate that too, and you can
Sure.
help them experience the joy. Speaking of which, hey, well done to, oh, I wrote this down from the beginning. Let's see if I have it here somewhere. Um, I am a force, Maria and Leslie's I'm Fishing with Pop Pop, and Save the Trees, and Ritu's Caras Dreams. Those books look really exciting. So I love the way that you
Mhm.
begin these meetings by celebrating
Yes.
each other's accomplishments, and
Mhm.
to recognize that this isn't a zero-sum game. You know
Exactly.
that that somebody else achieving something doesn't make it less likely for us; it makes it more likely. you know. And so
Mhm.
when we celebrate each other's accomplishments, we can help them experience that joy, experience some, you know, experience some rare moments, and
Mhm.
then also make it more likely for ourselves, because we're not putting up
Sure.
those
Sure.
ego barriers with the comparison game.
Yeah.
But
We're all
writers
in the
tend to
business of
succeed.
creating readers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And that
And
helps all of us. So
writing groups tend to
yeah,
succeed
great.
together. Yeah.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Todd, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. And we are going to have the replay up tomorrow, and I'm sure everyone's going to want to watch it again because you just gave us so much to think about. And what an amazing way to end our year. So I appreciate you being here tonight. And everybody, go get the book. It's great. It's one of those you're going to want to mark up. So get a hard copy. I don't even know if it's an ebook yet. I didn't even check.
It is an
It
ebook.
is.
And
Mhm.
I will just say, like, this book has a lot of footnotes because I wanted to
Yes.
kind of carry on a conversation, a dialogue with the reader about the
Mhm.
text for anybody who wants to go deeper. You know, so hopefully I try not to have the footnotes be boring. But the thing is if you do it on ebook, you have to touch the footnote to have it appear.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the way it appears on the hardcover
Mhm.
or paperback a little more because the footnotes are right
Mhm.
there.
Right.
But either way works. There
Either
is
way
an ebook.
works. And you can make notes on Kindle and stuff. I know
Yeah.
that. I just, I normally don't like writing in books because I feel they're sacred, but this one I was just like,
Right all
because
over
there's
it.
so many things you want to refer back to. So, yes. All right. Well,
Thank you so
thank
much,
you,
Laura.
everyone. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Yes. And thank you, Todd, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. Happy New Year to everybody, and we will see you January 4th back here. Don't miss it. It's going to be a great one. Be safe, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the holidays.
Happy writing. Happy
Um,
creating.
Happy creating. All right. Good night, everybody.